it's really important that you develop a habit of reaching out to people, setting up conversations that might be in person, over the phone, video call, it doesn't matter, talking to people one-to-one about the potential of leaving a legacy to the school. Welcome to the Independent School Podcast. Thinking and acting strategically is the key to both securing the future of your school and helping to build a more equal and just world. My name's Juliette Corbett. I'm a consultant, speaker and facilitator, specialising in helping independent schools. In this podcast, I translate tried and tested strategy and fundraising techniques into a language that works for schools. So if you're a senior leader in a private school and you want your daily work to feel less exhausting and more strategic, and if you want once more to feel the joy of making the world a better place through education, then you're in the right place. Welcome, and let's get started on this week's episode. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode where we're talking about building your legacy fundraising program. So legacy fundraising is where we ask people to leave a gift to the school in their will. And the terminology can be a little bit different from country to country, and certainly the taxation system can be quite different as well in the way that the legacies are treated. But basically this is about talking to people about the way in which they could leave a gift in their will, which is then activated upon their death. Now, legacy fundraising is a really important potential income stream for schools, but for a couple of reasons, it's not always given the priority that it should have. One of those reasons is because the income stream actually comes in quite a kind of lumpy fashion. There's one year when you can get quite a generous legacy, and then there might be a year where you get a couple of smaller legacies, very, lovely gifts, but not necessarily totaling to the same amount as you received that first year. And so it generates this feeling that it's based around luck, that if you get lucky, you'll have a good year. In actual fact, it's not luck. Developing a sustainable legacy fundraising program puts in place all of the important ingredients to generate that flow. And it's almost inevitable that income flow will look a little bit lumpy, but it's certainly not based on luck. It's also easy to put this kind of fundraising off because it's likely that your successor will benefit rather than yourself. So there's kind of a long lead time between talking to a potential legator, which is the name of someone we use for someone who leaves a gift in their will to the school, talking to a potential legator, and then the time that elapses before the gift is then activated can be quite long. So that's another reason why people sometimes put it off. And then finally, sometimes people feel a little bit awkward talking about death with people. And so it feels like it's going to be a more difficult conversation. I'm going to kind of burst the myth of that final one right here and now. Just like all kinds of fundraising, legacy fundraising is based around building trust with your potential donors and communicating the positive impact that their legacy could have. And although maybe a few people that you're talking to might find the conversation a little bit more difficult than other conversations about gifts, generally speaking, people are really open to the idea that by putting a gift into their will, it's often very tax efficient, and it's a way that they can help the school to have that transformatory impact through the fundraising project in a way that isn't going to disadvantage their family while they're alive. So one of the things that I talk about when I'm talking with directors of development is how to build a sustainable legacy fundraising program. And I'm going to be talking you through today the steps that I recommend people take. And it does use the idea of a legacy society. Now, I know not everyone is a fan of the legacy society model, but in my view, if you're short of resources, it's a really simple but effective way to build your legacies. But, and this is a massive big but, it's not enough to just set up a legacy society. We're going to talk today about how you can build a simple but effective framework around your legacy society that's actually going to really grow the number of legacy pledges that you receive. I just want to pause for a moment to say thank you to you. The Independent School Podcast has now passed its second birthday, published more than 100 episodes and has had over 6,000 listens. As the founder and host of this podcast, I've been really humbled by the number of people who have told me that it's really helped them. From school heads who've rushed up to me at conferences and told me how it's been a real guide for them through tricky times, through to experienced directors of development who have said it reassures them that they're on the right track. So thank you for listening and for all your kind comments along the way. If this podcast is helping you, then I invite you to join the 300 people who have asked to get my weekly emails. That way you'll hear about each episode as it's published, as well as the special offers that I only tell people about when they're on my mailing list. So to get my weekly emails, you can go to www.consultjuliet.co.uk/sign up. Okay, so let's dive into the detail, first of all, about what we mean by a legacy society, the format and the purpose of it. And although, please, by all means, do innovate and change things for your particular community, but it's actually quite surprising that generally what I see is quite similar from school to school with regards to the format that works. So the general way, the kind of the blueprint, if you like, the starting point for a legacy society is the format is that everyone who has pledged a legacy, these are called legators, become members of the legacy society. Now they have to have an option to remain confidential if they want to, but generally speaking, they're only going to be able to actually engage and get the benefits of the legacy society if they decide that they don't want their legacy to be strictly confidential. So members of the society, this is all legators, then get invited to an annual event. Now, because of the age profile of the members, slightly on the elderly side, often people do a lunch rather than a dinner. Often they'll do it maybe on a weekday because it's a little bit easier for people to travel potentially than the weekends. And often in the spring or summer, kind of avoiding the autumn or winter months, just from a weather point of view and people wanting to get out and about. It needs to be a free event, in my opinion. This is your stewardship activity. So it comes from a stewardship budget. So you need to think about the budgeting for this in advance. And when you invite legators, you also, in my opinion, need to invite a guest for free. Now, often that will be the partner of the legator, but sometimes there might be a carer required as well, in which case, generally speaking, assuming you're not on an extremely strict budget, I would say that you want to allow for a partner and a carer to come along with the legator free of charge if requested. Sometimes you can also, and you might do this some years but not every year, you could invite them to bring along another guest, another alum perhaps of the school for free as well, someone who might be interested in leaving a legacy but not yet actually done it yet. That's kind of an optional thing you could consider. Now, it's absolutely fine, especially in the early years, if this is quite a small, intimate event with a fairly small number of people attending, because to begin with, you might not have that many legators. That's absolutely fine. But obviously, the goal is to grow the number of legators over time. And in the very early years, you might want to think about adding this annual event actually onto something else, so that maybe there's a VIP invitation to something else that you're doing, rather than having it as a standalone event if you've got very small numbers in the early years. So you want to think about inviting some key guests from the school. You want to make sure you're thinking about some ex-teachers, some people that those legators really associate with your school when they think about the history of the school. And you want to invite some of your current school leadership and have a short speech of thanks and kind of an update on news from the school. So obviously it's ideal if the head is able to attend. Now, in addition to the event, some schools, not all, think about doing something like a legator pin, which is hopefully gender neutral in the sense that men and women can make use of it, something that marks them out specifically as a member of the Legacy Society. And obviously that would be free as well, so you need to budget for that too. And then the final thing, and this sometimes trips people up, is it needs some kind of name. Now, you can just call it the Legacy Society, that's fine. But often what we see is schools linking it to something to do with the history of the school. So, for example, using the year of the foundation of the school. So when I was back at Jesus College in Cambridge, we had the 1496 Society because that was the year the college was founded. Sometimes people link it to the name of the founder or the name of some other key person in the school's history. But I also see people get really stuck on this. They'll have sign off and budget for everything else, and they can't agree internally on what the name should be. If in doubt, just call it the Legacy Society to begin with. You can name it later. Don't let that be the one thing that holds you back. So the purpose of this society and formulating it in the way that I've just described is threefold. So first of all, we often find that there will be some people who will leave a legacy to the school and never tell the school that that's what they've done. And then when the will is enacted on that person's death and the gift comes through, it's a real surprise. And that's such a shame, because it means you haven't had the opportunity to thank that donor during their lifetime. And although you can thank the family, it's not quite as good as thanking the actual donor. So it gives people an incentive, if you like, to tell the school that they have left a legacy to the school, a gift to the school in their will. That then enables you to steward these donors. These are some of the most important donor relationships that you have, not least because these are some of the more elderly, potentially more lonely members of your community. Maybe not, maybe I'm making assumptions, in which case my apologies, but these are people that you really want to be giving a sense of belonging to. You want them to feel like they're really being honoured for that gift that they're going to be giving the school when their will is then activated. And so the stewardship opportunities are critically important, that you're able to have this opportunity to say thank you to the donor during their lifetime. And then thirdly, it also gives you an opportunity to be a bit more public about your legacy fundraising. So this isn't kind of a behind the scenes hush-hush thing we're a little bit embarrassed about. This becomes the kind of thing which becomes a news story, which goes into your annual magazine or whatever it is you're putting out there for alumni. It's kind of publicly thanking, but also encouraging others to join in and just making sure that people aren't feeling awkward and nervous about it. This is genuinely something where there is a real sense of belonging and community of these people coming together to support the school. So that's the blueprint of the classic legacy society. As I say, feel free to innovate, but generally speaking, start with this and see what you need to change based on what your community is looking for. But you cannot just create a society and expect automatically the number of legators to increase. It's just not enough on its own. There are other things that you need to be doing, and I'm going to be talking about 3 of those now. So one of them is the collateral, as we would say in the marketing world. So the marketing collateral around your legacy fundraising is things like having a website, having a web page. So it needs to be simple. You don't want to overcomplicate it. It wants to look visually appealing. It wants to talk about the transforming impact of a donation much more than the mechanics of the donation. You also want to keep it simple so that people have an incentive to request some more information from you, because that means you then know that someone is thinking about leaving a legacy in the will, which then means that you're able to have a genuine one-to-one conversation with them. So keeping the web page really simple but really enticing and powerful, and then with a call to action somewhere on that page for them to request some more information from you. The other piece of collateral that you might want is a brochure. Now, because of the age group of the type of people who are considering leaving legacies, and actually you'd be surprised, people consider their wills really quite young, often on the birth of their first child and or marriage and or purchasing their first home, whatever comes first, that tends to be where they're first thinking about a will. So actually we're thinking about younger people as well as the older generations. But when you're thinking about the core stakeholder groups that you're talking to about legacies, a physically printed brochure can be really nice. But it doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be expensive, you don't have to have lots of detail in it, you don't have to do big print runs. It could be something that's really quite simple, that's effectively just sort of a printed version of the web page, basically. Or it looks different, but it's got that kind of level of information in it. Now, you could do a mailing for this brochure, but I have found repeatedly that the response rate for legacy brochure mailings is very, very low. So for the purposes of this, the brochure is a tool that's then used in other ways. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. So maybe a brochure, if you don't have a budget, don't worry, it's not going to stop you. And even if you do have a budget, make it simple, don't overcomplicate it. The final piece of collateral that you're going to need, so you've got your web page, you've got your brochure. I always recommend as well creating the same information but in a PDF format. Now, it can be a PDF of the brochure, That's fine. Or it could be something else that you've designed. It could be other fact sheets. So maybe you have a PDF of the brochure, which is all very kind of beautifully set out with photographs and so on. And then maybe there's a fact sheet, potentially something different for different geographic regions, because obviously the tax situation is slightly different in different places. And it might be that those fact sheets you could print out and post with the printed version of the brochure. So they're kind of interchangeable. But having some PDF versions is really helpful in terms of sending people additional information electronically if it's not a printed collateral that they've been asking for. So that's the first thing to think about. You can't just have the society, you need to have some of this collateral to go with it. The second thing to think about is what I call as drip communication. So this is the idea that having the society and having the collateral, that isn't enough either. You need to drip the messages out into your community continually, but very light touch over time. So for example, you might have news stories about the impact of a legacy which has been given, about the society lunches that you've had, or notifications of upcoming legacy society lunches. You might put a question about legacies into some of the forms that you have. So the standard forms you already use, like address updates, event booking forms, etc., etc. Questions like, would you be interested in hearing more about leaving a legacy gift to the school? And if you've got space, also putting in, have you already put a legacy to the school in your will? You'd be surprised, especially when you're beginning, how many people have already done this without you even asking them to do it. You can drip that communication out in things like on the backs of programs of other events, or on the backs of menus for other events, potentially as a little part of your email signature. Be creative. Think about all the different ways that you can drip this message out. Now, you don't want it to be everywhere because then it becomes a bit overwhelming for people, but you do want it to be in enough places that people are going to see it. Now, if you are going to mail out that brochure, which I talked about earlier, actually, I think you need to be thinking about that mail out as part of this drip communications approach. It's not in and of itself the final action, the final call to action, because it doesn't really work that way. Very few people actually just respond to a brochure by making a gift in their will. But the brochure is part of this drip approach to communicating out to your community. Okay, so I've talked about your legacy society, I've talked about the collateral you might need, and the drip communications method that I'm recommending. Now to the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle. This is absolutely essential, and that is one-to-one asking. Asking people one-to-one to put a gift to the school in their will is the key to legacy fundraising. This is what is going to increase the number of legacy pledges that you have. Now, everything else that we've talked about builds up to support your one-to-one asking. So this is the final piece of the jigsaw that relies on everything else being in place. So very similar to major gifts, it's really important that you develop a habit of reaching out to people, setting up conversations that might be in person, over the phone, video call, it doesn't matter. Talking to people one-to-one about the potential of leaving a legacy to the school, giving them a wide update about school life as it is at the moment. You can ask their opinions on all sorts of things to do with alumni relations, fundraising projects, all sorts of different feedback you're gaining, and ask them if they've thought about leaving a legacy to the school. Now, it could be quite a general conversation that just has that one question in there. It could be a conversation that you set up where you're really clear in advance that this is a conversation about legacy fundraising. Whatever way you want to go is fine, but you're only going to increase the number of pledges if you actually talk to people and ask them one-to-one, in my experience. So everything else that we've just talked about builds up to this opportunity for one-to-one asking. So the drip communications that I mentioned gives you ideas of people to talk to. So the fact that you've got the question in some forms, the fact you've got some news stories coming out, that you're advertising upcoming legacy lunches and so on, means that people have a reason to contact you if they're interested. If you decide to do a mailing with a legacy brochure, that's great. It's optional, but that's great. But that gives you something to follow up on. It's a reason to then follow up with an email or a phone call. If you've got a legacy society, it gives you something to talk about when you're meeting with people and having conversations with them. And maybe, depending on your community, it might give you opportunities for peer-to-peer fundraising opportunities as well, which means that you're not the only person doing the one-to-one asking. Maybe other legators are also asking their peers to give a legacy to the school as well. And then the collateral gives you something to leave them with. However you're meeting when, whether it's over a video call, a phone call, in-person meeting, the collateral, so the brochure or the PDFs, gives you something to leave them with to think about after you've had that meeting. So all of these things come together, and ideally, you want all of these pieces of the jigsaw puzzle to have a really sustainable legacy fundraising program. But if you're really short of time, you're really short of budget, the one thing you need to do is the one-to-one asking. That is the key. And in my experience, if you don't do that and you have everything else in place, you will get some legacy pledges. You absolutely will get some people stepping forward, but you won't be reaching the potential of your community when it comes to legacy fundraising. So I would love to hear your feedback. Now, I'm really open to the idea that someone else out there has cracked the concept of a legacy mailing or has created a society which is so enticing that they don't have to do the one-to-one conversations anymore. If that's you, please let me know, because from my experience as a fundraiser myself and then working with school fundraisers, you really do need to do the one-to-one asking to make legacy programs grow over time. Great. So that's it for this week. I love to hear your feedback. Please do let me know what you think of this episode. Let me know if you've got any questions that I haven't answered. If you need any extra support, just reach out to me and let me know. That's it, and I'll talk to you again next time. Bye then. Thanks for listening to the Independent School Podcast, the podcast that helps senior leaders in private schools to think and act more strategically, both because they want to secure the future of their school and because they want to help build a more equal and just world. You can listen in everywhere that podcasts are available. And if you want to catch up on previous episodes or follow any of the links that I've mentioned today, just head over to www.consultjuliet.co.uk/podcast.